One of the main features of the democratization process at work in Eastern Europe in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, in the late 1980s was the emergence of nationalist movements in virtually every country in the region. Some of these movements gained significant power and played a key role in the fate of many of the communist regimes, whilst others remained too weak to influence the course of events. Scholarly opinion is divided on the underlying causes of these movements and their varying degrees of success. There are two main interpretive approaches, the primordial and the instrumentalist. The basic premise of the primordial approach is that group ties based on blood, race, language, residence, religion, and custom are stronger than any other ties, especially in societies with weak democratic, civil, and political institutions. According to Brzezinski, a leading proponent of the political cultural explanation, the explosion of nationalism was an inevitable outcome of the political culture of communism and democratization. One of the main weaknesses of the primordial approach in general, and its application to the former Soviet Union in particular, is its inability to explain why some nationalist movements were much more successful than others in mobilizing their ethnic communities, even when the existing political and socio-economic conditions were most favorable for such mobilization. The instrumentalist approach doesn't view the rise of nationalism as inevitable. The instrumentalist approach rejects the primordial approach's assertion that nationalism was caused by the politicization of the primordial ties during periods of political and economic upheaval. The instrumentalist explanation, applied to the rise of nationalism in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, can be subdivided into institutional and national choice approaches. The institutionalists explain the rise of nationalist movements in the former USSR and Yugoslavia as the unavoidable consequence of the communist regime's policy of the institutionalization of ethnicity, the most important social marker, and the elimination of all competing foci of group solidarity. These policies had two main consequences: the process of Nation B, based on the ethnic identity, and the growth of local political, intellectual and professional and intellectual elites, and often supported by the local political elites. Rational choice views nationalism as merely a tool in the hands of elites or ethnic groups in the struggle for power and socio-economic benefit. The emergence of nationalist movements is viewed as contingent on the calculations of the members of the ethnic group that the benefits, mostly of an economic nature, derived from engaging in nationalist collective union outweigh their costs. This approach explains the emergence of strong nationalist movements in the former Soviet Union in terms of change in the incentive structure. A decline in coercion significantly lowers the cost of engaging in nationalist politics, which makes the emergence of successful nationalist movements possible. The concept of the nation used draws on Weber's notion of ethnicity as a form of group solidarity based not on primordial attributes such as blood relations, but on invented ones such as subjective belief in common descent, and on Deutsch, Geller and Anderson, who argue that nations are creations of modernity because their existence requires an industrial society on its higher levels of literacy, mass communication and high culture. Brubaker suggests a useful basic typology of nationalist movements in their relationships to the state. He distinguishes between polity, seeking nationalism which strives to establish a national state, and nation, shaping nationalism which seeks to nationalize the existing state. It's articulated by representatives of the dominant nation who find the existing political, social, economic and cultural realities of their own state in contradiction with their ideological principles. The nation-shaping Russian nationalist movement was never very homogeneous. Under Khrushchev and Brezhnev, Russian nationalist intellectuals split ideologically on many key issues. Although this difference of opinion significantly narrowed between 85 and 91, important ideological differences nevertheless remain. It distinguishes three types of Russian nationalists: liberal, conservative and radical, and is based on ideological positions on a set of 9 key issues, ranging from attitude to Western political, social and cultural values in the pre-perestroika period, to responses to political and economic reforms initiated by Gorbachev. In Social Preconditions of National Revival in Europe, Prock proposed a 3-stage model of the growth of nationalist movements. According to this model, nationalist movements usually began Phase A, with scholars debating the seemingly apolitical issues of national language, history and culture. Phase B is the period of patriotic agitation, during which nationalistic societies emerge and their activists promote nationalist ideas among the population. The development of the nationalist movement culminates during Phase C, when the nationalist movement acquires a truly mass following. The period between 1953 and 1989 in the Soviet Union effectively constituted the combination of Phase A and B, since scholarly and semi-scholarly debates about Russian history and culture went hand in hand with the propagation of nationalist ideas in mass, circulated journals, movies and books. The Russia A-B phase could be called the era of politics by culture. In the years 1986 to 1989, politics by culture reached its peak, with the cultural intelligentsia playing a highly visible and important role in defining both the terms and the issues of the political debates, are far reflected by the meteoric jump in circulation of cultural newspapers and periodicals during this period, as well as by the cultural intelligentsia's heavy representation in the USSR Congress of People's Deputies, the first freely elected Soviet parliament. M.A.R.E.A emphasizes the crucial importance of the developments during Phase B for the future of the nationalist movement. In his view, Phase B determines whether Phase C will even occur. The A-B phase is crucial for the understanding of both the nature of contemporary Russian nationalism and its political fortunes. M.A.R.E.A also stresses the importance of socio-economic factors such as the industrialization and urbanization in the development of nationalism during Phase B. Intellectuals circulating Russian nationalist ideas appeared in the Soviet political arena quite soon after Stalin's death. The first group of Russian nationalists to be actively involved in Soviet politics were the so-called village prose writers, intellectuals who wrote fiction and non-fiction accounts of the social realities of the Russian countryside in the post-Stalin era. The popularity of both trends of the village prose among Soviet readers grew rapidly in the 1960s. In the 1960s, a third Russian nationalist group emerged on the Soviet political scene, the radical nationalists. Despite the fact that their writings explicitly challenged the official ideology, this group was exceptionally well suited for the role of articulated audience because they freely opposed the liberalization of Soviet politics and harshly attacked the reforms supporting intelligentsia which had coalesced around the literary journal movement. Between 1971 and 1982, the circulation of the journal Nash Sovetnyak, the most important Russian nationalist publication of the period, grew by 236%. That of Molbyatgodnya rose by 176%. During Khrushchev's years in power, the intellectual elite became the most outspoken and articulate element among the different social groupings, expressing positions critical of official policies and appearing in the pages of officially sponsored publications. Soon after Stalin's death, the most important of these publications were the most circulated Moscow literacy monthlies, which were issued in hundreds and thousands of copies. By the mid-1960s, the Russian intellectual elite was divided into two main ideological groups, each of which controlled a major Moscow think journal and had its undisputed leader in the editor of its journal. Gustafsson argues that under Khrushchev and Brezhnev, specialists were able to influence the formation of Soviet agricultural and environmental policies only when the political leadership was changing its policy priorities or when it perceived the situation in these areas as being critical. In such situations, the leadership would open a window, permitting public debate on the policy in question. The concept of opening window also can help to explain the content and form of Russian nationalism in the Khrushchev and Brezhnev eras. The two open windows. The two major subjects approved for open public debate in the Khrushchev era were the state of agriculture and Stalinism. Since Khrushchev had great personal interest in agriculture and saw every means available to improve its extremely poor performance in the post-war years, it's hardly surprising that agriculture became the first major issue open to public discussion. A few months after Stalin's death, his successors signaled to the intellectual elite that the public debate of agriculture could continue. This village prose became the voice of Russian nationalist sentiment and the starting point for the development of the Russian nationalist movements. During the Khrushchev era, village prose was written primarily by members of the intellectual elite from the purge of the war generations. In the last years of the Khrushchev era, the newly urbanized members of the Russian intellectual elite began to make their own contributions to this literature. There were two distinct phases in the development of village prose during the Khrushchev era, with the year 1956 separating the two. The first phase was dominated by the writings of Leonov, who continued his district weekdays with two additional installments, In the Same District and A Hard Spring. Both were published in M.A.R.E.A, and each was a more radical criticism of Soviet rural bureaucracy than its predecessor. Two works published in 1956, in the second and what would prove to be the last issues of the Moscow journals. These works were the first manifestation of Russian nationalism in the post-Stalin era. Even Dorsch 1908 to 1972 showed in Village Diary that the core of the problem facing the hard-working Russians was rooted in Stalinist methods of agricultural management. The second work of village prose that appeared in the Russian journals was to become a landmark in the development of Russian nationalism in the Khrushchev era. This work was one of the strongest condemnations of the Stalinist legacy in the countryside to appear in the official Soviet press before the Gorbachev era. Although the years 1971 to 1985 have rightly been credited as the era of stagnation by virtue of Brezhnev's determination to avoid radical political, social and economic reforms, political debates within the Soviet intellectual elite continued unabated. The disappearance of the Russian peasantry did not mean the end of village prose. Moreover, a new generation of Russian nationalist intellectuals had joined the village prose ranks. The most prominent among them were Boris Enkhov, Vladimir Krupin, and Vladimir Litnin. At the same time, Fyodor Abraham and Vasily Below, Boris Mesmer, Eugeny Novov, Valentin Rosvin, and Vasily Shvankslin. The fondness of the movement in the late Khrushchev and early Brezhnev eras removed the school's most populous and influential members. During this period, the village prose writers became ostensibly aware of the decline and disappearance of the traditional village and the transformation of Russia into a predominantly urban nation.